Hi, welcome to Gloomy Recaps. The story began with a married couple, Rachel, who was pregnant, and her husband, Matt, on their way to somewhere. Their journey was initially smooth and pleasant, until they realized that the road they were going to take was closed. Matt followed the detour signs, but he didn't pay enough attention to the road ahead, causing the car he was driving to crash into a fallen tree. The accident caused severe damage to their car, stranding the couple in the middle of a forest far from civilization. When Matt tried to call a tow truck service, he found that his cell phone had no signal at all. Amidst the chaos, Matt spotted a farm about half a mile away from their location. With few options, they decided to walk to the house to seek help. On their way to the farm, they saw a warning sign stating that the area was private property and trespassing was prohibited. Even so, they had no choice but to continue into the area. As soon as they entered the farm, a car suddenly approached them, driven by a middle-aged man. The man stopped them and demanded that they leave his property immediately. Even though Matt explained why he and Rachel were there, the man remained adamant and ordered them to leave. However, the situation changed when the man found out that Rachel was heavily pregnant and about to give birth to a baby boy. His attitude immediately softened, and he even became friendly. The man introduced himself as Bobby. He immediately told his wife Agnes at home that guests were coming. At first, Agnes seemed reluctant to accept unknown guests into her home. But upon hearing from Bobby that Rachel was carrying a baby boy, her attitude changed drastically. With enthusiasm, Agnes asked Bobby to bring them to the house immediately. When Matt and Rachel arrived at Bobby's house, they explained that their only purpose was to borrow a phone and that they didn't mean to bother anyone. However, Bobby welcomed them warmly and explained that a storm had damaged the telephone network in the area. So they were still waiting for a technician to repair it. Matt and Rachel finally accepted Bobby's invitation to stop by his house. On the way to the house, Rachel saw a girl dressed in black staring at her intently.
They are the welcoming committee.
Upon arriving at the house, the couple was greeted warmly by Agnes and their two sons, Luke and David. Agnes immediately ordered her children to help carry Matt and Rachel's belongings to the guest room where they would be staying that night. The kindness of Bobby's family made Matt and Rachel feel touched and amazed, considering that their original intention was only to borrow a phone. However, unbeknownst to them, their conversation was overheard by Agnes, who was standing outside the room without their knowledge. Not long after, Rachel was surprised to see a girl she had met before on her way to Bobby's house. However, when she told Matt, her husband, about it, Matt didn't see anyone there. Shortly after that, Matt and Rachel were invited to have dinner with Agnes and her family. While eating together, Rachel noticed a photo showing Agnes and Bobby posing with a girl who looked like the girl she had seen before. Curious, Rachel asked Agnes who the girl was. Agnes then explained that the girl was her youngest daughter, named Faith. But strangely, Faith did not join them for dinner. Agnes also added that Faith was their adopted child, just like Luke and David, who were also adopted because they had not been blessed with children. With confidence, Agnes said that God had a better plan for her and her family. In the middle of their conversation, the atmosphere became tense when Bobby suddenly got angry at one of his sons, who interrupted their conversation. This made Rachel and Matt feel shocked and awkward. After dinner was over, the two returned to their room. There, Rachel began to feel that something was wrong with Agnes' family. This was triggered by the fact that she had never seen Faith living with them in person. Added to that was the family's strange behavior. Rachel finally asked Matt to leave the house the next morning. But before going to sleep, they were startled by a sound outside the room that sounded like someone was eavesdropping on their conversation. When Matt checked, he found no one there. Realizing Rachel was looking tired and anxious, Matt urged her to go to sleep.
Can't get her out of my head.
The next day, Rachel woke up to the sound of crying coming from outside her room. When she turned around, she realized that Matt was no longer in bed. Rachel then saw Faith crying as she mourned her parents who had passed away. Faith approached Rachel and began calling her name repeatedly. However, it turned out to be just a dream. Rachel woke up in a panic and immediately realized something. She remembered the name Ellie Adams. Rachel immediately explained to Matt that Faith was actually Ellie Adams, a girl whose family had mysteriously disappeared and had been in the news for months. Rachel began to suspect that Agnes' family was involved in the case and responsible for the death of Ellie's parents. She didn't want to wait any longer and begged Matt to leave the house immediately. They got ready to leave and carefully went downstairs. When they reached the exit, they realized that the door was locked. Matt then looked for the key in a key box hanging near the door. Unfortunately, the key fell to the floor with a loud noise. In that tense situation, Bobby suddenly appeared behind them. Quickly, Matt tried to remain calm and said that he and Rachel planned to continue their journey on foot. However, Bobby just stood there silently without saying a word. When he was about to leave the house, Luke and David were already standing at the door holding weapons. David threw a hard punch at Matt, while Bobby attacked Rachel until they were both unconscious. When Rachel regained consciousness, she found her hands chained. Confused and panicked, she asked where Matt was. In the midst of this situation, Agnes informed her that Matt was now in much better condition. However, another reality was unfolding outside. Luke and David were busy digging a hole to bury Matt, who was still unconscious. They even removed all of Matt's clothes, leaving him with nothing. When Luke was about to end Matt's life with a single blow, David stopped him and decided to bury him alive. Luke deliberately left Matt's cigarettes and lighter in the wooden box, sarcastically saying that Matt might need them someday. Meanwhile, Rachel was giving birth with Agnes' help.
Why would you do this?
Soon after, a baby was born. However, the hope that the baby was a boy was dashed when it was revealed that she was a girl. Agnes took the baby out of the room, leaving Rachel exhausted as she tried to regain her strength. Not wanting to give up, Rachel tried to free her hands, which were bound by chains. After managing to break free, she grabbed a cross that was hanging nearby. When Agnes returned and started talking to her, Rachel tried to act normal in order to hide her intentions. But finally, she took the opportunity to attack Agnes. Unfortunately, the attack was not enough to save her. In a matter of moments, all of Agnes' family members appeared and immediately immobilized her. Once again, Rachel was tied with ropes around her wrists and ankles, so she was unable to fight back any further. In the following conversation, Agnes proudly admitted to killing Fitz's parents in the name of God. She felt she had saved her adopted child from the influence of evil demons. According to this confession, they believed that Rachel and the other parents had brought with them a culture that they considered abominable. After Rachel was silenced with a rough cloth so she could not speak, she was dragged to the hayloft.
Just like Faith all over again, isn't it, Bob? If they say...
Not stopping there, Agnes also forcibly pumped her breast milk for the child. On the other hand, Matt, who was slowly regaining consciousness, began to realize that something was wrong. He grabbed a lighter from his coffin and used it to get some light. Looking around anxiously, he found a part of the coffin that appeared to be damaged on the inside. Through the cracks, he could clearly see the ground around him. At this point, Matt finally understood the bitter truth. He had been buried alive in a coffin. With all his remaining strength, Matt began to hit the loose part of the coffin, hoping that there was still a chance to escape from this terrible situation. His struggle finally paid off. Matt managed to get out of the coffin with his body completely naked, not a single piece of clothing left on him. He walked aimlessly in search of help amid uncertainty and despair, but unfortunately there was no one in sight. After wandering around for some time without a clear destination, Matt finally found a small waterfall. Not wanting to waste time, he cleaned himself there to restore his freshness. A few steps from the waterfall, he found a thin piece of cloth, which he then used to cover his naked body. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Rachel struggled hard to free herself from the shackles that tightly bound her hands. However, all her efforts were in vain. Exhausted, Rachel fell back asleep until someone came to bring her food and drink. It turned out that person was Faith, or Ellie Adams, whom she knew from before. Rachel begged Ellie to help her find a way to escape. However, without saying a word, Ellie simply left her.
Can you help me? Please come back!
Meanwhile, the scene shifted to Matt, who was desperately trying to find a way out to the highway. He finally met two men who were camping. Matt tried to ask for their help and explained all the difficulties he and Rachel were experiencing. However, seeing his appearance, the two men thought Matt was drunk or even hallucinating. With no other choice, Matt was forced to get into a fight with them. After defeating them, Matt took their clothes and offered a compromise. He asked them to show him the way to the highway, and in return, he gave them a knife to free them from their bonds.
Just head down the hill. You'll hit it.
Elsewhere, Luke and David met Agnes in the room where Rachel had been staying. They knew that Agnes actually wanted a boy and proposed a surprising idea. For Luke and David to have children with Rachel. That way, Rachel would give birth to a boy, which they considered to be God's will. Hearing this idea, Agnes was furious and kicked them out of the room. However, Agnes' decision angered Luke and David. The two of them finally decided to go directly to Rachel in the hayloft, with the intention of forcing their will on her. At the same time, Matt managed to return home thanks to Ellie's help in tracking Rachel's whereabouts. When Luke and David tried to force Rachel to submit to their wishes, Matt arrived just in time, carrying a metal pipe in his hand. He struck both of them dead to protect Rachel. Seeing that Matt was still alive, Rachel cried with relief and told him that her baby had been born, a girl. Using his pipe, Matt cut the iron chains that bound Rachel. However, when they were about to escape from the hay barn, Agnes, who heard the clanging of metal pipes, immediately sent Bobby to check on the situation. When Rachel and Matt were getting ready to leave the barn, they found Bobby waiting with a weapon. Matt sacrificed himself to protect Rachel and became Bobby's target. After that, Bobby hit Rachel with his rifle, knocking her unconscious. Once again, Rachel was found tied up in her original spot. When she regained consciousness, she realized that Ellie was also chained with her, trying to free herself from the iron shackles. On the other hand, Bobby found Agnes busy dressing Luke and David, who were already dead. Agnes, unaware of their deaths, asked Bobby to release Luke and David immediately. They finally buried Luke and David in a field with 3 crosses. After mourning their passing, Bobby asked Agnes to go home. However, Agnes, who was still unwilling to let go of her son's passing, decided to stay and told Bobby to go home first. Meanwhile, Ellie and Rachel managed to break down the brick wall connected to the chain. They managed to remove the chains from their necks and hands before heading to Bobby and Agnes' house to save Rachel's baby. Upon arriving at the baby's room, Rachel was relieved to see her newborn baby safe and sound. However, the atmosphere became tense when Bobby suddenly returned home. Rachel and Ellie had no choice but to hide in the closet. After making sure his baby was okay, Bobby left the room and headed to the hayloft to get a breast pump. When he realized Rachel had escaped, he immediately returned to the house armed. This time, Rachel decided not to run away again. She asked permission to breastfeed her baby directly without the help of a pump. Bobby agreed to her request, but unexpectedly, Rachel hid a knife.
Liz, she doesn't want you near the baby.
After that, she immediately took Bobby's cell phone and called the police. Unfortunately, at the same time, Agnes arrived at the house and realized something was wrong when she saw the key to the hay barn still hanging in its place. She took her gun and stood guard outside the house. However, shortly thereafter, Agnes decided to leave using her tractor to go somewhere. Meanwhile, Rachel and Ellie slowly left the house carrying Bobby's weapons. They rushed to the car but couldn't find the keys. It turned out that Agnes was watching them from a distance. She then approached Rachel and forced her out of the car at gunpoint. To protect Ellie and her child, Rachel left the car and faced Agnes alone. A battle was inevitable. The two exchanged gunfire, although most of their shots missed. However, Rachel was shot in the arm and leg, making it difficult for her to move. Despite her injuries, she was determined to prevent Agnes from approaching her baby. In a brutal final battle, Rachel managed to overcome Agnes by repeatedly slamming the woman's head into the ground until she finally won. Rachel and Ellie left the house, and shortly thereafter the police and ambulance arrived at the scene. The officers and medical team tried to find out what had actually happened. However, the situation became tense when Agnes, who was still alive, appeared from behind the ambulance and tried to shoot Rachel. Luckily, the police immediately noticed her and acted quickly, shooting Agnes dead. One of the officers then asked for an explanation about Ellie Adams, the name previously mentioned by Rachel. Amidst the chaos, Ellie mysteriously vanished without a trace from the scene. Rachel finally realized that the girl she had seen in the house earlier was not the real Ellie Adams. It turned out that all along, her attempts to escape from the house had only been accompanied by the shadow of Ellie, who had actually already passed away. Furthermore, one of the 3 crosses at the cemetery shown in the previous scene turned out to belong to Ellie Adams, with the name written as Faith Fairbairn. In the end, Rachel and her baby were taken by ambulance to the hospital. Their journey brought the entire story to a close. That's the plot of this film. I hope you enjoyed it and see you in the next video.